So, instructional designers. In New Zealand organisations, we've seen a proliferation of openings for this particular role in recent years. It's almost become sexy to have at least one on staff. So Nigel, how does this reflect your experience globally, and what do you think it actually means to be an instructional designer these days?
I think it's not a simple answer to that question. It's not just one thing, but it doesn't reflect globally, actually. I'm amazed that New Zealand has become the kind of foremost employer of instructional designers in the world. Isn't that great? It's fantastic.
Excellent.
In many organisations, instructional designers have been allowed to kind of drift away, and a lot of instructional designers who used to work for organisations are now freelance. Right. So there are good people working for not just one organisation, maybe 10 organisations, and they're also caught up with the kind of technology conundrum. Do they specialise in one technology, or do they try to be generally knowledgeable about a whole bunch of technology? All of that kind of stuff. And also the dimensions of the role are changing. Like Elliot Maisy says, no, I don't talk about instructional designers. I talk about learning producers. They should be akin to a producer of a stage show, Broadway, which he's involved in a little bit. Someone I know who works for BP calls herself not an instructional designer, but a learning designer. Others call themselves as learning communications managers. So there are all sorts of elements of the job, and none of those things quite cut it. They're not quite precise enough. So what it really says is that the field is broadening, and what is clear is that if you can be so impolite as to say a bog standard instructional designer, someone who applies instructional design principles to learning, that role I think is evolving into a much more critical role, you know, almost like the centre stage where there's the content and the organisation and the learners. All of these people are coming in, and you need someone in the middle who can say, right, I understand that, so I'll interpret that to these people about that, and I'll interpret those two things to this person here, so that everyone is starting from the same point, everyone understands the natural end point, and you've got someone who can take some really good and powerful decisions and argue a case to make the best possible learning in the circumstance, and not necessarily do it. There are other people who can kind of do it, I put it into some piece of software, but it's a higher level skill that I'm talking about. Someone who is kind of engineering the process and making the process work. I think that's a fantastically powerful role, and one that I think will get stronger rather than weaker. But the other side of that is that a great person working in the field will say, this isn't going to be a learning, this isn't really learning. I think a checklist would do here, to kind of back off, because you'll get people who say, I need a big interactive, blah, 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 without even thinking about what the end point is. So a great instructional designer starts with the end point in mind, and then works back and makes sure every part of the complex architecture is clear and also linked together, so that you end up with a really good structure, not one with bits sticking out and other bits falling off. So I think it's a great role, but I haven't seen massive employment opportunities around the world, unlike New Zealand. Pointing the way again, as usual.
Great stuff.
As usual.
Yeah. So it sounds to me a little bit what you're saying there is, for instructional designers to be truly successful in their role, they do need to consider taking a more strategic view about what's happening. You know, obviously their technical skills still need to be spot on, and they need to, you know, challenge things at that technical level, but you see a real role for them strategically as well. Would that be fair?
Yeah. I also think generally in L&D, moving more into the strategic area is becoming increasingly important. Same for HR, same for instructional design. That's captured. I talked to one person who was working in the US, and she said, when I started my career, I barely spoke to anyone. I used to get stuff in, I would process it, stuff would go out. Now I spend my whole time talking to people. So in other words, it's not just sitting there fiddling around, it's actually engineering the whole process, moving more strategic. Great way of putting it.
Great. It's great we've still got a strong instructional design community in New Zealand then.
It's very important.
Thank you.
Very important. Thank you very much, Kate.